Mr. President, in 2002 and 2003, you contemplated the possibility of military action against Iraq and the regime of Saddam Hussein. It was asserted by many intelligence agencies that he had weapons of mass destruction and programs to build them, as he had done in the past. Some of that information turned out to be wrong. How did that happen, and does it, in retrospect, would that have changed your point of view, your decision on the Iraq military action?
Yeah, that's, Michael, that's one of those questions that I just didn't have the luxury of answering. In other words, I could try to answer it, but it just didn't happen that way. And this book lays out how history unfolded. I laid out a doctrine that said, the Bush doctrine, that in order to protect the country, we had to be on the offense. We had to hold people to account who harbor terrorists, and we had to deal with threats before they fully materialized. It's one of the lessons of the attack of September the 11th. Plus, that we would spread freedom as the alternative to the ideology of those who murdered the innocent. And the world saw Saddam Hussein as a threat. I literally mean the world. And I felt it was important to deal with him because the biggest danger facing America is weapons of mass destruction in the hands of, in this case, a surrogate, had he so chosen to do us harm. One thing that's clear in this book is that I tried to make diplomacy work. And there was an exhaustive attempt to convince Saddam Hussein, one, that we meant what we said at the United Nations Security Council. By the way, there's a debate in my administration as to whether I should have gone to the United Nations Security Council at all, and I'll walk you through that debate. Some members said, no, you don't need to. You just need to say, give him 20 days or 40 days to disarm.
Well, your position, as you say in the book, is that legally he was in violation of previous
correct.
UN
and so he didn't need one. On the other hand, what's interesting that I think will interest people here in America is that I wanted there to be a coalition of freedom-loving nations who are willing to confront Saddam so that he would understand that it's just not the United States that was demanding that he disclose or allow the inspectors in. It was a lot of nations. But those nations cannot act without a UN Security Council resolution. Certainly not the case for America, but a lot of nations, you know, the leaders said, let's go to the Security Council. And I wanted to build a coalition. I agreed to do it, and we passed a unanimous resolution. And then I started conducting what's called coercive diplomacy. On the one hand, we had a diplomatic track. On the other hand, we had a military track, trying to send signals to Saddam Hussein that if you defy the free world again, there will be consequences. And it's, you know, in terms of the weapons of mass destruction, what I think people forget is that prior to my arrival in Washington, the Congress overwhelmingly passed a resolution calling for regime change in Iraq. And after September the 11th, Congress overwhelmingly passed a resolution authorizing me to use force necessary to protect the American people. It is when the difficulties began after the liberation of Iraq that people began to change their mind, which sometimes happens in politics. But it can't happen if you're the commander-in-chief. In other words, you can't be playing politics with the security of the United States and with those who wear our uniform. And yeah. Anyway, it's a painful experience. I mean, I'm certainly not equating the pain that people feel when their child is sent into combat and gets hurt or loses life. But it's a difficult decision for the president. And no president should ever commit our troops without serious thought about the consequences.
You know, Mr. President, President Obama spoke in his post-election press conference in his last question about the strength he's gotten from speaking with families of military members and members that have fallen. You write about this in the book. Can you tell the audience something
about it? Yeah, I do.
I
write about it a lot. Because I want the American people who read this book to understand the incredible strength of character of our military families. And so I tell the story about a woman named Valerie Chapman who I met. Her husband was an early casualty in Afghanistan, and I go to see them. She and her 2 children 5-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old daughter. And I talk about going eye level with the children to tell them how courageous their dad was and how I fought back the tears because I didn't want them to see a weepy commander-in-chief. I wanted them to hear the words, "Your father was an heroic person." And after the meeting, Valerie handed me a pamphlet, and she said something to the effect that, you know, if anybody questions this, you show them this. And on the pamphlet she wrote, "John did his job, now you do yours." And so there's a lot of meetings like that where the strength of character of our people come out. I mean, we're a blessed nation to have incredibly brave, courageous people who volunteer in the face of danger and their families who support them.
Mr. President, some of my friends in London didn't think that you would get along very well with British Prime Minister Tony Blair. He's a sophisticate, London-style, third way.
But I'm not a sophisticate? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm just saying what some of my friends in London suggest.
Yeah.
Tell us about.
Yeah, Tony Blair and I became fast friends. I admire him a lot. I admire him because he's a courageous person. I admire him because when he gives you his word, he keeps it. I admire his sense of humor. Laura and I spent a lot of time with he and Cherie. And I made a lot of friends in the international arena. John Howard of Australia, for example. I better not start naming them because I'll leave somebody out. But I would say Tony and I ended up with a very fast friendship. What's interesting is I found it to be unusual to find politicians or people in elected office to be able to look beyond the horizon. And I felt Tony Blair could do that in a way that was very strategic in thought. And I believe heads of state need to be strategic in their thought and have a long-term view of issues. And Tony had that view.
Now, you did have a few debates with Cherie Blair.
I had one on the death penalty. Yeah, I did have one on the death penalty and probably got lost. But I made it clear to her. She was objecting to my position when I was governor of Texas as supporting the death penalty, and as president for that matter, supporting the death penalty. I happen to believe, as I made it to her, if justice is fair and swift, the death penalty saves lives. And she didn't agree.
You were reelected with a majority of the vote, the first time in 16 years that a presidential nominee got a majority of the popular vote. You had political capital. You went in on the Social Security issue first, and only later in 2006 pushed for changes in our immigration laws.
Right.
Those were not successful endeavors. What have you learned from that? Or what?
Well, if I had to do it over again, I'd probably run the immigration plan first. But I didn't. So I pushed Social Security hard, and the truth of the matter is Congress didn't want to reform Social Security. And there's an issue, I feel, in all due respect to my friends from Congress, where Congress is more reactive than proactive on the issue. And I didn't get support from either party. Nevertheless, I pushed hard on the issue because I think it is essential that we reform Social Security. It's just unfair for young Americans to be paying money into a broke system. And it didn't work. On the other hand, I made it clear that I didn't go to Washington, as I said, to play small ball. I went there to deal with problems and not shy away from them because there might be bad political consequences. And so Social Security failed, and then I ran the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Plan, which was widely praised after I gave the speech there in the Oval Office. Nevertheless, the issue got away. I mean, the issue became, the rhetoric on the issue was very difficult, and and if somebody was nervous about the borders, and I can understand why people are. We ought to enforce our borders, but the automatically labeling any comprehensive plan as pure as instant amnesty made it very difficult to get people to pay attention. And I have no regrets in trying both issues. That's what you do when you're elected to office. You try to solve problems. In both cases, I was unsuccessful.
Mr. President, in decision points, you have a chapter on Iraq, which goes into 2003 and a little bit into 2004. And then you have a chapter later in the book on the surge, where you talk about how in the spring of 2006, you came to believe that our strategy in Iraq was failing and that you needed to make changes in that. That resulted in the surge strategy, which I think is generally agreed to be have been successful. How did you turn the government? Why did you change your mind? How did you turn the government around on that?
Well, first, I changed my mind because I felt we were beginning to lose. And a loss in Iraq would be a major blow to the security of the United States. It would have meant that the sacrifices that had gone on prior to that moment would be in vain. It would embolden enemies. It would send shockwaves throughout the Middle East. And I've always believed in the universality of democracy, of freedom, that freedom exists in everybody's soul, and that if we could get the right strategy to bring security in place, then the people would be given a chance to express their desire to live in a free society. But the problem is that the politics, we push politics first, and we're very successful initially in terms of the Constitution and votes, but the security situation deteriorated to the point where democracy couldn't take hold. And I decided that it was just, it would have been catastrophic as far as I was concerned. So I asked Hadley, my national security advisor, get some options. It took a while to implement it, and I walked the reader through why a president...
So you talk about changing your mind on the strategy in the spring.
Beginning in the spring, but I needed to see options.
The announcement comes in January '07, you announced.
Right, that's right. But I needed to see options before you can actually make a move. And so that took a while to develop the options. But then I needed to convince people in my own administration. And then, as Don Rumsfeld told me, he said, you know, we need new eyes. And the truth of the matter is, I needed, in order to make the plan work, I had to have a new Secretary of Defense. In other words, people would not have believed it was necessarily a new plan unless there was somebody else saying this is a new plan. And was introduced to Bob Gates as an option. And then that led to needing new generals. And so we need a lot of things happen. But really what happened was the 2006 campaign interceded, and I feel very strongly that the commander-in-chief should not be making key military decisions in the midst of a political campaign, because it sends signals to our troops, you're nothing but, you know, you're being used for political purposes, and that would be a major mistake. And so one of the lessons for future presidents, if they choose to read this book, if you unfortunately are a commander-in-chief, don't play politics with military strategy. How are we doing? We can go for a while.
You can go on.
Yeah.
See, we had, Mr. President.
We'll do 3 more questions.
Okay.
Mitch is getting ready to put the hook on me.
Let's ask, in the book you account how you had experience in handling hurricanes in Florida in 2004 and 2005, where you say they had a competent governor at that time. And then comes,
what do you expect me to say?
Then comes Hurricane Katrina in 2005. You were accused by a singer of not caring about black people.
Yeah, look, it wasn't just one person. This was an opportunity for people to use the response to Katrina as a way to label me a racist, and I didn't like it one bit. And I expressed significant displeasure. Yeah, you know, you can call me names, which they did, but being labeled a racist is something I just I couldn't stomach then. I can't stomach now. It's just really unbelievably unfair. There's some. I mean, Katrina was